And I will try, and if you do put something in the chat, Naira, maybe you can shout those out since I can't be trusted with Zoom. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And what I'm going to spend my time today talking about is the growing body of work that we have in developing a performance-based test for monitoring dementia risk. And I'll really talk about the evidence within Alzheimer's disease. But as we can maybe talk about at the end, if our hypotheses about this being something more generalizable beyond dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, I think that's okay too. And I do just have a disclosure. I'm not going to be talking about any of our spun out work, but we do have a small company that we've pursued in response to some of this work. And I really want to highlight that none of this work would be possible without a really great team of collaborators and mentors. And I think what's so great about academic research in biomedical spaces is the ability to collaborate, mentor, and be mentored. And so I just want to put a snapshot of some of those individuals who have been a part of the work that I'm going to show you today. And I also want to highlight the charter associated with Arizona State University. And this has long been the charter for the university, but really it has, since arriving to Arizona State University in 2016, I've really embraced this charter because it speaks to the goals and directives that I want to try and accomplish with the work that we do, having work that's of public value, serving our community, and it being inclusive in who it involves. So I want to go back to our title, developing a performance-based test for monitoring dementia risk. And I feel like we can't really talk about this without kind of setting some basic definitions when I mean monitoring dementia risk. We know that there are a number of screening tools out there that can be used that are quick, that assess different aspects of cognition. I've listed them here, and you're probably familiar with some or all of these. And these are really designed to quickly screen global cognition or aspects of cognition. However, because dementia is defined as cognitive impairment that is severe enough to affect one's daily functioning, we can't really talk about dementia without also considering measures of daily function. And those are listed above here, the CDR, the QDRS, the ECOG. These are all things that are out there that can be used to briefly or more extensively evaluate the level of daily functioning an individual may have. The CDR, or the Clinical Dementia Rating, is a very well-known assessment that's used in a number of clinical trials and is used extensively in Alzheimer's disease research. And these others, you may be or may not be as familiar with them. But I want to kind of touch on what all of these measures and other measures that fall into this category have in common. And they all involve subjective reporting from an informant, particularly because someone who is experiencing cognitive impairment, particularly when they have memory problems, may not be a reliable source for whether they have cognitive impairment or not, and certainly their ability to sort of recall the extent to which their daily functioning is impaired or not. And so subjective reporting from an informant is really critical to get a sense of how impaired their daily functioning might be. An example that I'll show you is the CDR. The CDR is sort of scored on a scale of 0, 0.5 or 0.5, 1, 2, or 3 is shown here. And this is based on a CDR sum of boxes that's scored 0 to 18. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the CDR or are not familiar with how it's administered, there's a semi-structured interview that the examiner is running the informant through, and they ask them several questions that kind of pertain to a number of different domains: memory, orientation, community affairs, as such shown here. But you can really appreciate how there is sort of a subjective report from an informant here. However, I really like this study because it just goes to show how kind of subjective these informant reports can be. So in this study, they actually looked at over 20,000 CDR scores or the CDR reports taken from the National Alzheimer's Coordinating Center, or NAC, and found that higher CDR scores were associated with the informant being female. So the gender of the informant seemed to matter, whether the informant was an adult child or not, and certainly the amount of the frequency of contact that the informant had with the individual significantly impacted a person's CDR sum of boxes, which kind of makes sense. But I want to kind of bring this back to results that really drove the FDA approval of lecanemab, this phase 3 clinical trial, and the difference between the CDR sum of boxes between the control and treatment group was a difference of about 0.45. And so I really want to highlight that the difference in scores between the sort of treatment group is similar in size to the effect of informants on the score. And while this is kind of just inherent to the sort of informant-based measures, I want to highlight that not everybody has an informant. It's an estimated about 25% of the older adult population do not have an informant. And certainly, even if they do have an informant, some of the predefined or described daily activities that they are asked about may not be relevant. And I give this example where I put the money here because in my own family, my mother has not really managed any of the family finances over the years. And so asking her questions about, or asking her informant, do you see a change in the extent to which she manages money, is probably not going to be relevant because it wasn't something she did in the first place. And so there really is a clear need, and I hope I can kind of begin to convince you that there is a clear need for tools that can objectively monitor the impact of cognition on daily function that don't require an informant. I do want to note that we are not the only individuals or only groups doing this. A number of assessments exist out there that are performance-based, and they're listed here. This is not an exhaustive table, but this is just a sampling of what's out there. And you can see that they are performance-based, meaning people are doing something rather than asking somebody else about them. But they can be quite long, taking some upwards of 45 minutes to administer. The examiner would need to be formally trained to administer these tests, and they often include very expensive equipment. And you can kind of see a brief description on the right-hand side there. And so there are performance-based tests out there that do evaluate daily functioning, but they may not necessarily be practical in a number of different situations. And so our goal, sort of our engineering challenge, was to develop a brief and easy to administer and objective measure of daily functioning. And over the years, as we've been kind of growing this line of work, questions have really emerged on, is this a test that can be specific to AD? And the reason that we have this goal, or these goals, are to really address some lingering needs in the field. One is to address the need of a co-primary functional outcome for Alzheimer's disease clinical trials, and also kind of practically or clinically speaking, a method for monitoring and possibly triaging patients outside of specialist care. And what I mean by these two needs are really come from a number of agencies over the last few years with the kind of prevalence of these clinical trials that are evaluating anti-amyloid agents and other drugs in these Alzheimer's disease prevention trials. We're really asked to, or urged to, consider co-primary endpoints that really look at the effectiveness or efficacy of that treatment. So for example, if an anti-amyloid agent shows significant breakdown of amyloid, or the accumulation of amyloid is slowed or diminished in the treatment group compared to the control group, but that sort of biological effect doesn't translate to cognitive or functional changes, then that might be an issue. Or you can see a very small biological effect of the drug, but if there is a very large functional impact, that can help sort of showcase and highlight the treatment efficacy. And then if we think about clinical implications or clinical needs, we know that wait times for dementia specialists are very long. The 12-month window is, I think, a conservative estimate or an aspirational estimate. And this is kind of a problem if individuals would benefit from interventions or other therapeutic or other therapies, but they have to wait so long to be seen by a specialist. And so having some kind of quick and easy tools that could be administered in more primary care or community health settings can help sort of triage or streamline individuals who might be the most urgent for specialist visits. And so we think we've developed something that falls into this category. And so here's just a video of what we have people do. And yes, it is as simple as this. We are asking people to scoop beans from one cup to another. And I'm glad that in my introduction, it was mentioned that I have sort of a background in stroke rehabilitation, because this tool, as it sort of exists today, really got its origin story really comes from my former training as a postdoc in trying to develop stroke rehabilitation tools to improve daily functioning. But what we found kind of further along in looking at the data is people's ability to really learn the task and improve on it with practice really depended on the level of cognitive impairment that they had. And specifically, we found over the years that visual spatial deficits, particularly visual spatial memory deficits, really impacted the level to which people could improve or kind of hone in on performance on this task. So we've been able to show that it is brief, performance-based, and objective, as you can kind of see here. So we have an instrumented version of this task in our lab. We can collect kinematic data, that is, how the person is moving over the course of the trial. We ask people to use their non-dominant hand, and I'll show you why in just a second. They have to scoop 2 beans at a time. Happy to answer why that's the case. And they do 15 reaches per trial. So they go in a left, center, right order, and they do that until the number of beans are in the sort of start cup are gone. And you can see that we can kind of collect movement quality data, but ultimately the data that I'll show you for the rest of this talk really is as simple as time. So we time people on how long it takes them to complete a given trial. And kind of at the very initial stages of this, we found that people were significantly slower with their non-dominant hand. And so we're not really sitting at this ceiling effect. And so this is why we ask people to do the task with their non-dominant hand. But what we found is if we ask people to do this just 6 times, which takes about 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how long an individual trial takes, we kind of see 2 profiles. You can see on the left that trial time is on the y-axis. We can think of this as task performance. And as people practice it just 6 times right in a row, you can see that they're pretty good and they get a little bit better. This is in contrast to the profile on the right, where they start off a little bit slower, but you can see that their performance is much more variable. And this is just a sort of a schematic example. This is an example of 2 different profiles or 2 different participants. But what I want to sort of set the stage for here is we're looking at intra-individual variability. So how much people are stable or variable over the course of repetitive practice. And this aligns with a much larger body of work within the cognitive domain, where variability is often associated with more cognitive impairment. And this is based on prior clinical data that is sort of not from our lab, but we're just observing a very similar trend in the motor behavioral data. And so throughout my talk, I'm going to just just note that our measure of intra-individual variability is the within subject standard deviation. So what is the standard deviation of trial time across these 6 trials? And so what I'm going to do is just briefly summarize the work that we've done to date, and then I'll kind of go into our next steps. So we've been able to show previously that our task is associated with Alzheimer's disease staging and biomarkers. And I'll just be fully transparent, we have not had the opportunity to evaluate individuals diagnosed with dementia due to other etiologies. So the specificity to Alzheimer's disease is something we're just now starting to explore with plasma biomarkers, as well as other clinical populations. But so the data that I'm showing you has been really fleshed out only in a cohort of individuals diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. But you can see here that across individual participants, you can see how performance across those 6 trials changes for somebody who's cognitively unimpaired, who has a diagnosis of amnestic MCI, or has a diagnosis of mild AD. Now, this is just individual subject data, but we can see across groups that you can see that the intra-individual variability increases with Alzheimer's disease staging. We also have looked in a cohort of individuals who've been diagnosed with amnestic MCI, so not across the AD spectrum, but within individuals who have amnestic MCI, we see differences as they relate to amyloid PET. So here, this is just 2 examples. We have 2 participants who are matched in terms of age, sex, education, memory performance, and the one on top is considered to be amyloid negative based on their, I think it was flutometamol was the tracer of interest based on the SUVR of their flutometamol. And the case below it was an individual who was amyloid positive. And you can see how their intra-individual variability, that standard deviation measure, is higher in the individual who was amyloid positive. Again, certainly this is just exemplar cases, but in this particular paper, we also looked at a cohort of about 40 individuals with amnestic MCI and found that when we included performance on our performance-based test into the model, we could more accurately predict who would, or more accurately classify individuals who would be amyloid positive and amyloid negative based on their PET SUVRs. And then also, since the hippocampus tends to be selectively affected or experience advanced or accelerated neurodegeneration in cases of Alzheimer's disease, we wanted to see whether our task was impacted by hippocampal atrophy. And you can see here that worse scores or more variability are associated with lower hippocampal volumes, or think of more hippocampal atrophy. And we did a study where we just looked at hippocampal volume, and then we've been able to replicate that finding in 2 additional papers where we take a more agnostic approach to say, okay, given the MRI data that we have, what are the regions of interest that are most associated with performance on our task, and ensure, in fact, we find that the hippocampus and some other Alzheimer's disease-related regions are associated with performance. And interestingly, motor cortex does not come out in that classification and regression tree analysis. So this really highlights that we are kind of checking the box of this does track in the way we would expect it to. But as if you remember from my talk title, we really want to see, is this a measure of daily functioning? And so we had the opportunity to compare performance on our test with the Quick Dementia Rating System, or the QDRS. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that measure, it is a really quick 10-item survey that's given to an informant, and it covers the kind of domains listed here. And higher scores are worse or sort of more impaired on the QDRS. So you can see here that we see an association between task intra-individual variability, or the standard deviation, with the QDRS. But what I want to also really highlight is the floor effect that you see, or I guess the ceiling effect for the QDRS. So if somebody scores a 0, you don't really have the granularity in subtle functional impairments that might be important for monitoring or early identification of dementia risk. One of the nice things, though, about the QDRS is it is often used in its sort of purpose is to estimate a clinical dementia rating score, or a CDR, because the CDR, for those of you who aren't familiar, it takes about an hour to an hour and a half to fully administer. And so it can be prohibitive and for a number of reasons. And so the QDRS is kind of thought to be a way to estimate a global CDR. And so when we do that with the QDRS data, we see, again, more of a proof of concept or a validation that our task is sensitive to differences in CDR. So it is associated with existing measures of daily function when an informant is present. So over the years, inevitably someone asks, either as a reviewer or as somebody coming by one of my posters. So I'll just be transparent about it here. If you kind of can appreciate how movement is essential to not only our test, but any performance-based test. When you ask people to perform something, is it a concern that they may have motor impairment that can come from a number of different origins? And so we wanted to kind of empirically address that. And so we had some retrospective data that allowed us to sort of answer this question. And so you can think of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease as, I guess, earlier stage Parkinson's disease, where they may have motor symptoms but may not necessarily have cognitive symptoms yet. So if you think of this in a very binary way, which we know that this isn't the case, but Alzheimer's disease is often considered to be a cognitive disorder, and Parkinson's disease is considered a movement disorder. And we then had data from a cohort of both of these conditions or diagnoses, as well as a neurologically intact kind of control group. And again, this was not a prospectively designed study. We were able to kind of secondarily look at data from these three groups, and the characteristics are shown here. But what I want to really highlight is when we use ROC analysis to see if we can correctly identify or classify people based on an Alzheimer's disease or a Parkinson's disease diagnosis, we can. So this is based just on, this AUC is based just on their performance on our task. And you can see that we can pretty well classify individuals based on a cognitive versus movement disorder. However, if we try and classify people based on having Parkinson's disease or being neurologically intact, so really the only difference is whether they have motor impairment, we are not able to, what's left up to chance. So we're not very good at differentiating between movement disorder, but we are very good at differentiating between, identifying a cognitive disorder. And so I understand the task is motor based, but the way that we score the test, and I'll show you that in just a second, is much more sensitive to cognitive deficits, not sensory motor deficits. So going back to the value of that intra-individual variability measure. And so our data really suggests that our test that we have is not really good as a sensory motor test. It's much more sensitive to cognitive deficits. And I'll illustrate that here a little bit more. So here we have those sort of performance curves over the 6 trials for 2 individuals who have no motor impairment and no cognitive impairment. Then we have 2 individuals, one who has post-stroke hemiparesis and one who has Parkinson's disease. And the data that we had for this individual for a different study, they were assessed on this task while on their exogenous levodopa. And you can see that they are slower on any given trial than the people who are unimpaired, but the amount of variability between trials is about the same. So if we look at what the unimpaired individuals' average and standard deviation are, and then if we look at what the person with stroke or person with PD look like, their average trial time across the 6 trials is much higher. I hope that my internet might have just cut out. So their average trial time is much higher, but the amount of variability that they experience over those 6 trials is the same. And so the way that we score this test, looking at variability, allows us to sort of dissociate motor impairments from cognitive impairments. And just to kind of further illustrate this point, in a earlier project, several years ago, we collected data on individuals on our task, as well as we had them do the grooved pegboard. And this is really kind of a fine motor or a dexterity measure. And we can see that when we look at the average trial time, it is associated with dexterity, whereas the standard deviation is not. So this is really just what we're doing with our trial data, and how we're scoring the task overall allows us to look at different aspects of behavior. I also want to bring this up because for those of you who administer neuropsychological assessments or cognitive assessments, you may have, I'm sorry, is my internet cutting out, or is it just my video?
Only a little bit, but it's not for too long.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it's pretty good. Yes, pretty good.
Okay,
Don't
I
worry.
just,
You sound very well yet.
okay.
Yeah, good.
I will just keep talking until somebody flags me for something. So, okay. You may kind of observe this anecdotally, or you've read the literature about one of the challenges with a number of cognitive assessments is you kind of have to, depending on your measure, control for or normalize for participant characteristics. But we have been able to show that I think because our task is procedural or performance-based in nature, we're really resistant to characteristics, participant characteristics that sort of lead up to social determinants of health. And so these data that I'm showing you here are some preliminary results from an ongoing Alzheimer's Association project, where we have data from Hispanic Latino participants as well as non-Hispanic participants. And the goal is equivalence when you kind of control for health factors. And in fact, that's what we're finding, and that's the sort of the intent of the project. I also want to highlight that when we look at an extensive neuropsych battery, our test does not show effects of sex or education, participant sex or education on scores. And so we have the symbol digit modality tests, the Hopkins verbal learning test, and others that are shown here. And in this regard, having a significant effect of sex or education is not necessarily a good thing, because then you have to control for those characteristics when you're considering whether a score is good or not. And we do not see an effect of sex or education when we look at our test. And so I know I've just dumped a lot of information on you. So I want to just do a quick recap that we've developed a test that is brief, performance-based, and objective. Our data, at least as of now, suggests that it is associated with Alzheimer's disease, both sort of the staging of AD as well as some standard biomarkers of AD, though there's still room to explore that. We've validated against some aspects of daily functioning, and it doesn't seem to be sensitive to sensory motor deficits in the way that we score the test, and it is resistant to participant characteristics. But I want to go back to those two kind of real world goals of something for an outcome for clinical trials, as well as a kind of clinical triaging tool. And so a question that we've been more recently exploring is, can it be collected remotely or unsupervised? So everything I've shown you kind of up until now has been in a very well-characterized clinical sample in the lab or in a clinical research setting. And so to do that, we've actually leveraged the MindCrowd cohort. I don't know if you're familiar with MindCrowd, but it is a kind of a multi-institutional collaboration that was started by my collaborator, Matt Hunnelman, shown here. And it is an entirely electronic cohort, meaning people sign up and do a bunch of tests online. And his goal is to get data from 1,000 people, or excuse me, 1 million people, and I screenshotted this yesterday. So he's at about 850,000 people have completed the baseline Minecraft memory test. And it is just ripe for data analytics. But I actually was giving a talk at our Alzheimer's Consortium meeting, and he was like, I definitely think, he approached me afterwards, like, I think we should get this, see if we can do this in Minecraft. So basically, we identified a subset of individuals in Minecraft who we thought might be, willing to do this. We contacted them via email and said, can we mail you a kit? They said yes. We mailed them a kit of a kind of a disposable kit. They had to assemble it at home, administer it, and then they just uploaded their trial times into their Minecraft portal. And so it was done completely remotely and completely unsupervised. And what we found is that in this, this relatively small sample, but our scores are reliable. So people can collect, or we can collect information on this test remotely and unsupervised. I kind of say that this is the most interesting, boring data you'll see, because we don't see any difference between data that are collected in Minecraft and a sample who were collected in lab. So I know that this is not a intra-individual reliability, but we're working to get those data in the future. But for now, it looks like we can collect data reliably or feasibly out in the wild using Minecraft. And so that kind of leads us to where we are today with the much larger Minecraft project. And I want to speak to one of the advantages of working with Minecraft, in addition to it being kind of nationwide. It eliminates a whole bunch of barriers as it pertains to human subjects research and participation, but specifically that this cohort sort of matches representation of Hispanic and Latino adults nationwide. So about 18% of the cohort identifies as Hispanic Latino. You can do the entire study entirely in Spanish. You can opt to do that. So we send, if they opt to do our test, we have instructions and everything in Spanish. So this is the sort of larger Minecraft online. Kind of a subset of the Minecraft study that was launched just a little bit over a year ago is this Minecraft Mobile Lab, or MLab. And this is kind of getting out into the community, but a face-to-face research experience where individuals have a brain scan. They provide a small amount of blood for genetic risk factors, as well as plasma biomarkers. There's some behavioral testing, and then as well as a very brief cognitive assessment. And what this looks like in real life is there is a trailer that is hitched to the back of a truck that can tow it. And in this trailer, on one side, there is an ultra low field MRI, the hyperfine scanner, for those of you who are familiar. And then kind of in this smaller door right here is a little wet lab where plasma can be collected and stored. And this figure here is a little bit old. I know that they've been to more locations. This was for a proposal that I put in June. But they've collected about 1,000 individuals where we have brain scans and blood. And we just received funding for a project that allows us to leverage this setup and this cohort to begin to validate our assessment in the context of this larger study. And what's shown on the right here is just sort of the demographic breakdown of the mobile lab cohort. So you can see really how sort of inclusive the sample is. And what I think is really important, is the recruitment or involvement of individuals who come from rural zip codes. And this is the advantage of having a lab that can drive around and park in a Walmart parking lot in towns that are otherwise very difficult to access. Also important, as I mentioned earlier, about kind of the clinical pragmatism of dementia specialist wait times, and how do we take a really high volume of people, only some of who probably need to be urgently seen in the specialty care. And really, those would be the individuals who are more likely to progress over time. We know that even being biomarker positive doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is going to progress towards dementia over time. And so how can we monitor and evaluate individuals what's going to happen to them in the near future in terms of cognitive and functional impairment? And so in this particular study, we had data on individuals kind of cognitively based on the mini mental status exam and functionally based on the Quick Dementia Rating System, or QDRS, over a 1-year period. And because we want to account for practice effects and we want to really look at reliable change over that 1-year period, we evaluated change based on a Z-score derived from a regression-based change formula. So I can talk more about what that looks like, but you can kind of appreciate that 0 means no sort of reliable change over a 1-year period. And we can see that intra-individual variability on our test was associated both with, at baseline, was associated with more cognitive change as well as more functional change when change was kind of correctly quantified through the regression-based change formula. Now, again, this is over 1 year, and we know, though, that progression can take a lot longer, and it can take years to decades for people to progress towards dementia. And so is there a way that we can, do we see an effect, or can we kind of identify individuals on a longer time scale who might be at risk of developing dementia? And one of the challenges in studying a more performance-based or motor-based assessment is there really just hasn't been data on a large scale or at the population level to really evaluate this. And so I actually wrote a proposal that was accepted to the Fulbright, US Fulbright Scholars Program. And so I was able to go to Sweden last year because there were cohorts that had relevant data that would help me answer this question. And I was able to extract data from 3 different population cohorts, the Octo-Twin study, the SATSA study, and the gender study, that had sort of performance-based or motor-based assessments in them, as well as cognitive information, as well as whether an individual was diagnosed with dementia or not. And so to just briefly describe this study, everybody included in the analysis had MMSE scores, and all 3 of these studies were longitudinal. So we had about 10 to 20 years of data from individuals in these cohorts. So we had the MMSE that was collected every 2 years. We had data on how they performed on this, what translates to an ADL apparatus, which is something that evaluates functional fine motor performance. That's just how quickly they could plug a plug into an outlet, put a key into a lock and turn it, screw a light bulb in, put coins into slots and dial on a rotary phone, the numbers 1 through 9. We also had grip strength on these individuals, as well as the time to complete a 3-meter walk test. And now we have a number of measures that all are kind of scored differently. And so we looked at T-scores to allow us to compare kind of apples to apples. And then most importantly, we had age match samples. We were able to extract age match samples of people who did receive a dementia diagnosis at some point during the study, and those that did not receive a dementia diagnosis during the time of the study. And to account for missingness of data and sort of the heterogeneity in the studies, we use a linear latent growth curve analysis, and we centered it on either the time of dementia onset or the last study visit. So that's a lot of talking, but I'll show you with the data on the next slide. And I know that our task that I've been describing up until this point is not the same as the ADL apparatus, but I actually took this apparatus back with me from Sweden, and we're trying to do some validation work to see if these tests have a lot of overlapping constructs. But what do the data look like? So what I'm going to show you are some graphs, but I want to orient you to them first. So time 0, or this intercept, is for the individuals that developed dementia. This would be the time of dementia onset. For those that did not develop dementia over their time in the study, this is just simply their last visit. And this is to give us the sort of longest runway of time leading up to the intercept. The individuals who developed dementia are shown in the solid black line. Those that did not are shown in the dashed line. And this is what it looks like for the gait variable. So higher means slower. Again, these are normalized to t-scores, but you can see that the slopes for the dementia and no dementia groups are not significantly different. This is also the same for grip strength. So these are not, you could argue, very good indicators or predictors of eventual dementia. However, when we look at the functional fine motor test, you can see that about 10 years prior to dementia onset, we start to see these lines diverge. Though I think the latent growth curve analysis is not the best way to estimate sort of the timing of all of this, when we look at the point of inflection, we see that the functional fine motor test gives us about a 1-year sort of running start into who will eventually be diagnosed with dementia or not. And so this is really just to kind of contribute to the larger proof of concept that performance-based measures that involve fine motor skill have the potential to identify dementia progression. So I know that's kind of the work that we've done to date. I want to close out my time now just sort of talking about some high-level projects that we have going on that build on this sort of validation work that we've done in either kind of clinical or laboratory settings here. And they kind of span a larger translational continuum from bench work and then all the way to implementation science. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some work that we just started involving animal models, and then I'll close with some sort of real world projects that we have going on. So one of the challenges with Alzheimer's disease is, and other related dementias, is the window of developing them is quite long. It takes years to decades to sort of go from a preclinical to clinical stage, and only some people develop it, which is a good thing. However, to identify biomarkers of disease or develop tests that can help us monitor the progression, that makes it very difficult. And so can we utilize transgenic rat models or transgenic animal models to help us identify biomarkers in an earlier time window? And so this really kind of basic question that I had was, are there functional fine motor deficits that emerge earlier than memory deficits in these transgenic animal models that are known to recapitulate into the disease quite well? And so I've been working with my colleagues here at ASU to first develop a kind of rodent version of the performance-based tests that we have. I'm happy to talk more about that, but that paper has been published. You can check that out. So we evaluated wild-type rats and transgenic rats on this fine motor test, as well as the Morse-Water maze, which is kind of this canonical cognitive assessment for rats and mice. And sure enough, our preliminary data show that we can start to see these functional fine motor deficits earlier, even at 6 months, when in the transgenic rats compared to wild type, whereas we don't really see memory deficits until a 12-month period, or the age of 12 months in these rats. And so this is, again, kind of corroborating our human level data that came from the Fulbright project. And now we are expanding the longitudinal cohort and increasing our frequency of collection. We're involving neuroimaging as well as histology to really characterize the pathology and can help us identify some underlying mechanisms for this. And then what I want to finish with are just two kind of what I think of as kind of real world studies, taking this out of a very controlled setting and putting it into real world use. And the first one is really related to, can this help us better understand dementia in the context of homelessness? And so My collaborator, Heather Ross, shown here, we actually just sat next to each other at graduation in like the faculty section. Just a little under a year ago, we started chatting. She told me about what she did. I told her about what I did. And then fast forward, we now have this, this collaboration in really trying to utilize kind of in a use case our assessment to help better characterize unhoused older adults as they come into the shelter system. And this is really important because this is a very fast growing and kind of overall large population of those of adults who are experiencing homelessness. And, you know, it's not surprising that the rate of dementia is much higher than the general public in this population for a whole host of factors. But I want to kind of go back to the gold standards of how we evaluate daily functioning. How do you evaluate functional impairment in adults experiencing homelessness? It's very unlikely that they have an informant. And if we look at the questions that are asked in these questionnaires, they really are just not applicable. And that's kind of illustrated in the examples I've provided here. And so is our test, since we've sort of validated it as possibly a helpful tool to estimate or approximate daily functioning, can we use this here? And so it's been fantastic working with Heather because she is very well connected and integrated for her own research with the Central Arizona Shelter Services, which services the unhoused population within Central Arizona, particularly in the Phoenix area. And in January, a non-congregate shelter setting was opened in North Phoenix. That it was like a kind of a condemned old Super 8 motel, and the city of Phoenix converted to a non-congregate shelter for unhoused older adults 50 and over. And it's called The Haven. And so just about a month ago, we took a team of student researchers to The Haven on kind of like a 2-day, let's see what we can get kind of thing. And we collected our test, the MOCA, and a couple of other very short questionnaires to really just kind of get proof of principle. And what we found, first of all, was that the majority of individuals, we were able to collect 55 individuals in this sort of first pass, only about 25% of them scored above the 26 cutoff on the MOCA. And Heather's been able to replicate, or we were able to replicate previous research from Heather. So MOCA scores are much lower in this sample. We then have, since we've been able to show associations between our test and performance on these cognitive measures, we were able to replicate that in this sample here. And also we were able to show that sex education and age were not really, they were not significant factors in their performance on our test. And when we compare the effect of MOCA on our test, as shown here, when compared to sort of a housed, very sort of typical, well-characterized older adult sample, we see a similar effect, showing that the confidence intervals between the unhoused group from the Haven and this larger cohort of housed older adults, those confidence intervals overlap. So that was a good thing to show that we're kind of able to tap into a similar effect. And so our next steps here are really more at the implementation science level, which is a direction I would love to go, but I definitely need to do it in collaboration with others to evaluate the feasibility and acceptability of our test as part of a larger intake process. And really to see how is it effective at better identifying downstream resources and decision-making pathways for individuals who come in showing signs of cognitive and functional impairment. And then lastly, I'll just close with this. Something that is kind of getting off the ground now too is the integration of our test with this Chimane Health and Life History Project. And so Ben Trumbull, who's shown on the right there, he also works here at ASU. I gave a talk really similar to this in the psychology department here, and he happened to be in the audience. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I was really struck by sort of the lack of effect on sex and education, but particularly the education piece, because he's part of this Chamane project where the Chamane are this kind of horticulturalist group in central Bolivia. And they are still hunters and gatherers. And this is a project that he's been a part of for many years. And this is of interest for Alzheimer's and dementia because this cohort, or sort of this population experiences very low rates of dementia relative to other cohorts around the world. And this larger project is designed to look at what factors might be contributing to that and what can we learn for the larger kind of questions associated with dementia and Alzheimer's disease from this cohort or this group of the Chamane. But he was particularly interested in learning more about our assessment because the Chamane have zero literacy and zero education, as we in sort of like Western biomedical research and clinical care define it. And so a lot of the tests that we use to quantify cognition and daily functioning can't really be applied here. And so I sent some of our kits with the research group down to Bolivia earlier this year. And I had these like little plastic yogurt cups that we used because that's what we send out for our disposable kits. And they thought these look really cheap and are kind of flimsy. So actually somebody within the tribe thought or correctly identified that they could do better. And so they actually fashioned out of wood a version of our test. And that's now what they use to annually test individuals. And so we have about 448 Chamane that we have tested longitudinally on this assessment. And Ben is on paternity leave right now, so I don't have any data to show you. I told myself I wasn't going to bother him, but he kindly shared this photo of the work that he's been doing. And so our next steps are really to kind of validate these scores. What do they look like? And we have plenty of cohorts to compare them to. And since this is a longitudinal cohort, we can utilize some of our in-person data to help establish reliable change across these repeated visits. So this is a summary of what I showed you before, but now also we have data on sort of the ability to collect this remotely, and you can define remotely very broadly, and it can help us identify individuals who may be at a higher risk of progressing over kind of the short and medium term. You kind of got a little flavor of some of the other directions we're going in terms of animal models and implementation science. I'm going to put a shameless plug in. If you know anybody that might be interested in our MindCrowd and Mobile Lab project and they're wanting to do a PhD, let me know. My email address is there. I also don't know if anybody from your team attends the Gerontological Society of America conference, but I will be presenting there next week. So if anybody happens to also be there and wants to chat or connect, my email is there, and definitely don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for your attention. I just want to acknowledge the funding support that has contributed to this work. I am definitely happy to answer any questions, but thank you for your attention. And I'm good on time too.
Yeah, very, very good. Well,
Yeah.
bravo. This was a beautiful presentation. I think this is super encouraging for all of us. And yeah, very, very interesting points of view. Very innovative point of view. So I would like to open the floor for questions. If anybody has questions here. I have several ones, but let's see other people, they want to bring questions. Well, if not, I will jump with the first one. Let me double check first on the chat. You can also write your questions on the chat. We will be able to to see them. Okay, the first question will be, is Okay, I see you are comparing the test to the mock and to the brief assessment, but what about how this is, because you are measuring in a very in practical terms the praxis. Okay, so you are a lot of praxis, so it's okay, you are measuring the ability to do the movement because the movement has to be engaged with an intention, and the intention is understood. So that so it's a high level functioning. But the question is, how is this correlated, for example, with the trail making in the NAC? Because there should be trail making is also doing this kind of assessment. Of course, needs some more education. That's the caveat. It's a big problem. If you don't have a certain level of education, the trail making is not very good. And also with a lot of deterioration, you can get also a lot more of damage. Have you done the correlation between those traits?
Yes. So I'll just try and repeat your question to
Yeah.
make sure I'm answering it correctly. So,
Okay.
yes, we've done kind of like these brief cognitive assessments like MoCA and MMSE.
Yeah.
But when we have access to the uniform data set, right, or like
Yeah.
extensive neuropsych evaluation, how does this map on to your question is about Trails A, but also, other kind of well-established neuropsych
Yeah.
tests be in the UDS.
Mhm.
So great question. There we have well, a paper that we published in 2023, and I'm happy to send it to you if you'd like. We have access to kind of a full neuropsych battery. Not all of the UDS is in there, but we have like list learning and HVLT and trails, A and B, and we applied this classification and regression tree analysis because instead of saying, oh, is this correlated with trails and is this correlated with verbal learning, we wanted to instead be more agnostic and say, let the data sort of rule in or rule out the cognitive domains or these neuropsych tests that are most associated with performance on our test. And this was done with our biostatistical consultant. So I can't get too in the weeds with this CART analysis, but it allows us to be more agnostic in our approach. And this is much more of an empirical approach. And we found that, yes, our task is associated with Trails A, which would make sense because there's this sort of speed component.
Yeah.
And it's also associated with sort of list learning, which is sort of this immediate recall. It was also associated with line orientation, which is the sort of visual space, just sort of very basic level visual spatial ability. And also in that paper, we did the same. We did a CART analysis for the neuropsych data and a CART analysis for the kind of the free surfer data that came from our structural imaging. And that one kind of, what I think was important from that paper was the cognitive domains that were most associated with our test made sense or really kind of mapped onto the brain regions that also emerged from that. And so one of the challenges that's come from our ability to kind of put a pin in a lot of this is the data sets that are big and have a lot of a very comprehensive neuropsych workup that have the UDS in it, they have little to no motor or kind of motor behavior data. So NAC and ADNI, I think NAC maybe only has like they have abnormal or normal motor function based on a neural exam. So
Yeah.
like I would love to sort of get a larger cohort that has a very well characterized neuropsych workup to really address like, well, what aspects kind of we'll say verisimilitude, like which cognitive domains do we think are really being pulled from for our test? And if I see you a year from now, I think we may have an answer to that because we're to get some data through the Arizona Alzheimer's Consortium here, but the data haven't been transferred, so I can't answer that question.
Yeah, no, definitely it's super interesting. That's great.
Yeah.
Anybody else has another question here? Let's see. Please feel free to raise your hands or to jump in, unmute yourself. Let me see. I can see the list of participants here. Ouch. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, that was one of the questions. And other thing that caught my attention is okay, the task is okay, it's very basic, very valid for that reason, because people don't need to have training or knowledge to do that. So you made the proof of concept using this in a group, in a human group that was pretty much isolated with very low education, and they did a beautiful thing. That's the value of the human interaction. So they give you the best, the improved tool to do that. That was really touching, really touching. So this is interesting. So, the next step for you, and you told that this is also available online. How the online version compares with the COPS and the
Yes.
COP task?
So I want to clarify that this is not an online tool. I'm just going back here to my
Okay.
slides.
Yeah, it was at the very beginning, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Here, yeah.
Okay.
So we just leveraged an otherwise online cohort. So we can think of this as just like a recruitment tool, but we did mail a physical kit. And I think importantly, you can see how the components of this are very cheap. So we have been able to mail kits to people, get the materials and the postage for less than $10 per person. So that's our budget for it. But it is still a physical kit. And NIH reviewers really don't like that it's physical. They want it to be an app, or they want it to be a computer game. But I think there is a lot of relevant conversation that I think just really needs to be put more in the forefront of the digital divide. And I know that a lot of research participants already have access to the internet, and clearly they have access to the internet in the Mindcrowd cohort. But we're just using this as a recruitment tool to get access to people nationally. But even today, my internet kind of wasn't great, and I'm here in a major U.S. city at a university, right? And so I think if the goal is to get a more generalizable picture of dementia risk, or even just sort of how do people generally perform on this test, being mindful of the digital divide is something that at least we are trying to do. And I'm just going to, because people kind of asked me this question, so I'm just going to advance to this that has really driven kind of the philosophy behind some of this too. And again, originally this was like just kind of proof of concept. Can we throw something quick and dirty together? And yes, maybe somebody else could develop a more virtual reality version of this or whatever. But I was on a run like maybe last year, and I was listening to this podcast about bricks being used as batteries to power like something like cell phones, like out in very rural areas, like out in the desert. And I was really just struck by how, because I admit, like, in a way, I'm a little bit self-conscious about how simple this task is. I mean, it's scooping beans, it's like yogurt cups, and, being in biomedical engineering, people are doing some really advanced, cool stuff. And then sometimes I'm a little self-conscious about the simplicity of our assessment. But I was really struck by this podcast about how something like a brick, if you know the intrinsic properties of it, you can leverage it as a really simple solution to solve a complex problem. And so we have not really gone into, I have a collaborator here that's like, is wanting to develop a more AI-driven digital version of this. But I think we will forge on with the real basic version 1.0 to get some proof of concept data that could then maybe better bolster the justification for a digital version. But we haven't done a digital version to date. I don't have the expertise to really do that, but I have some collaborators here that want to take that on.
Yeah.
But so far, everything's been super basic. It's literally just how long does it take you to do it? And then we kind of extract the signal by looking at the variability in those scores.
I have a quick
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. We have. Okay. Yeah.
so
You're ready, Nina. Okay. Yes, please.
super quick. It's because it's about this. When you mail the participants the kit, do you ask them to record the like them doing, or is it just like self-reporting how long it took?
Yeah, so the score sheet asks them to, so the score sheet is just there so they don't have to have like a laptop or a web open, and then they just enter their scores from their score sheet in when they might be online. So we ask them to time themselves. There's some instructions on how to set it up. There's like kind of a placemat looking thing that we've printed. It's like, put the cups here, here, and here. This is what you need to do. We had them do like a practice with their dominant hand, which they tell us what the time is, and then they do it. In the Minecraft studies, we've done it 4 times instead of 6 times, but you get the idea. And we asked them to tell us their trial time. Did they forget at all the direction they were going, and did they drop any beans? So kind of like a yes, no error. And that's something I didn't talk about, is we do record errors kind of in all of our studies, but the rate of errors is quite low. So we can't really do any statistics on it, because for most people it's 0. That isn't to say that in other cohorts, like dementia with Lewy body or frontotemporal dementia, those errors might be much more valuable. But for now, we collect them, but they don't really inform us anything analytically. And then they just put them in to the portal. And a question that I often get, and that Matt, my collaborator, always gets, is how you know people are telling you the truth. And my response to that is, as somebody that kind of grew up in the face-to-face research world, even when you ask somebody, tell me your age, I never ask them to show me their driver's license and verify their age. And so the sort of like, are people giving you honest information is something that we just have to sort of believe, both in person and kind of remote data. And though probably not relevant for this particular project, but for these completely remote cohorts, studies have shown that when you ask more personal information, or things like, prior drug use or sexual orientation or number of sexual partners, things like that, you're actually more likely to get a truthful response or accurate data at a distance remotely than face-to-face to a study coordinator. And then lastly, so in our Minecraft data, we've collected about 1,400 individuals so far. And we can do some really cool kind of data analytic approaches to kind of akin to like bootstrapping, where we can kind of flip people's responses, or kind of introduce some error to see how robust against those sort of erroneous input errors or things like that, how stable the true effect is to things like data entry errors or things like that, which we've done in some other studies. So the large enough sample and the representativeness of that sample allows us to answer some important questions, and we have kind of rigorous post-processing standards by which we say, can we trust this data point or not? I see there's a question in the chat also.
Yes. Okay, great. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. She can put a question there.
Yeah.
Okay. You can see it.
Yes, so talk about how the mobile MRI works for participants in the data
Yeah.
collection. So I don't know which aspect of the mobile MRI you'd like me to speak to, but basically the very low fields, the hyperfine MRI is kind of commercially available. So this is not something that the mobile lab created. I think it was originally designed to be a pediatric scanner, but it's like a 0.05 Tesla magnetic field. So you can have it in just like a non-shielded environment. And you can get basically some structural MRI data. So like obviously you can't get very subcortical, but to do some basic cortical structural MRI, we can do that. And that's the hyperfine team has done the validation work. I obviously have not, but I think the data collection takes about an hour, where people do kind of some neuropsych or cognitive assessments on the sort of online memory test. They draw blood, do some basic like grip strength measures. They're also doing a smell test, and then they do the MRI. We're just starting to analyze those scans now. So I don't know if that answers the question of how the mobile.
Yeah, well, actually, that was one of my questions. Another question I had, it was about the MRI. Basically, are you able to get the parcellations from free software from those MRIs? Well,
Yeah.
that's excellent. Yeah, if you can
You
have,
just get a nifty
yeah,
file. Mhm.
yeah, that's perfect. Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We need one of these mobile units here too, and we will be really eager to run your assessment. It's going to. I mean, personally, I would love to learn this assessment and to provide data to you if you.
Okay. Well, we can chat offline.
Yes,
Definitely.
definitely. That would be really, really cool. We have our population is 75 Latino. And here in the dementia study, we have maybe about 60 something Latino in Spanish done. So that will improve those ratios too. It's great. Anybody else has any other questions? I think this is an amazing presentation. I think really innovative and with a simple solution, which is so valuable. Sometimes we are looking for things that are sophisticated and some things that are just the pen and paper or just a few materials can provide a lot of information. This is really, really beautiful. Sydney, this is really outstanding. This is
No, thank you.
really good. Well, I think this is great. We will return you a quarter of hour of your time.
Everybody.
Yeah,
Everybody gets 2 minutes
yeah.
back.
Okay, Nira, here are the announcements. We have the next iteration of this research seminar series on November 18. It's going to be presenting Leandro Rodriguez Medina. He's going to be presenting Health Without a Center, Epistemological and Political Challenges of Knowledge Decentralization. Interesting. We are looking for the new cohort of scholars for the RGB RECMA. So if you're interested, contact Claudia Alanis at the email here in the screen. Don't forget to vote. We are having a voting today that is for the DPRIT. I think it's a very valuable innovation here, and it's going to be a very good push for to help with Alzheimer's. And we have the 2025 Walk to End Alzheimer's on the lower valleys. This is going to be at the Brownsville Event Center. This is in Paredes Line, for those who don't know the place. Check in on November 8th at 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't know about this event, so thank you, Neira, for putting this. Probably I will go. I will be there. It's going to be good. I think we should all of us go there as a team. Think about that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Sydney. This is beautiful work. Really, really exceptionally good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for
Beautiful. Thank
taking the
you.
time in your afternoon to listen.
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for being with us, and let's keep in touch. Thank you so much. Have a very good evening, everybody. Thank you.